amazing artist, and welcome back to, I think this is week 5 of our gratitude portraits. So far we have practiced drawing our portrait. We drew a final portrait. We practiced different techniques of value, hatching, cross-hatching, stippling, scribbling, and finger blend. And then we added one of those techniques to our final drawing. So our final drawing should be pretty much done. The drawing and adding value, those shadows and highlights to give the face more form and make it look more realistic. Today we are going to take a break from the drawing and we are going to do something a little bit more fun, a little bit more carefree, and we are going to do a watercolor painting for the background of our drawing. So I'm pretty excited because we're going to use a really cool technique of a watercolor that I'm going to show you in just a minute. But first, let's go over what you're going to need. So of course you're going to need paper, and it's important that it's the same size as your drawing. So my drawing was done on a 6" by 6" piece of paper, so for my background I wanted to keep that the same, because whenever we cut out our portrait we are going to glue it to this background, and we don't want this to be super big and our portrait be really small, and we also don't want our background to be too small and then our portrait covers up our whole entire background. Okay, so make sure it's the same size as your portrait. You're also going to need watercolors, but if you don't have any watercolor, then I actually have a video that I posted maybe a few months ago with our crystal clusters project. For the background there, I showed you how to actually use markers and turn it into paint by just painting some water on it. So go watch that video if you don't have any watercolors, to just refresh your memory on how to do that. You will also need a paintbrush if you're going to be painting, but if you're going to do the marker version, you can actually do that with like a cotton ball or a cotton swab. Just look around your house, guys, and use what you have. And of course, if you're painting, you're also going to need water. Also, guys, if you don't have markers, then you could just color your piece of paper using crayons or colored pencils, whatever you have at home. We are going to be doing a certain watercolor technique to get this really cool effect, and we're going to use salt for that, so you're also going to need some salt. So if you're just going to color your paper using crayons or colored pencils, then you won't get to do that part, but it's totally fine as long as you have some colored background. Alright, and that's everything that you're going to need. So I hope you guys have a lot of fun with this technique. I absolutely love watercolors. It's probably one of my favorite paint to use because you can just do so much stuff with it, and I'm going to show you how to add salt to it to give it a really awesome, cool effect. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so I have my watercolor paper here, and it is the same size as my portrait because once this watercolor painting is dry, we will be cutting out our portrait and gluing it on, so it will create a beautiful background. Okay, now before you get started, watercolor paper is really interesting because there are two different sides. One side has a little bit of a texture on it, and if you hold it in a certain way in the light, you can actually see the texture. I'm not sure how well you can see it on my phone, but in person you can really see it well. And then there's a smooth side. Okay, the side that has no texture on it, that's the side that we will want to put our name on. Okay, because we want to paint on the side that has the texture. All right, so on the smooth side, we are going to put our name and our class code. All right, once you have your name and your class code, then you can flip your paper over and we are ready to paint. Now we are going to use a watercolor palette today, and inside of this watercolor palette you will find the 3 primary colors: red, blue, and yellow. You will also find the 3 secondary colors: purple, orange, and green. Over here we do have brown and black. Those are called neutral colors, okay? But since we are using analogous colors for this painting, we cannot use brown or black because those are actually found in the middle of the color wheel instead of the outside, and those are the colors that we're looking at are the outside of the color wheel, those primary and secondary colors. Remember, if you mix red, which is a primary color, with, let's say, orange, which is a secondary color, they will make a color called red-orange, which is called tertiary. Okay, same with, let's go with blue. Is that primary or secondary? Blue is primary. and green, that's secondary, right? So if we mix blue and green, what color do we get? We get blue-green, which is a tertiary color. We know tertiary colors because they basically have two names, the primary color and the secondary color. So for example, there's yellow-orange is a tertiary color, red-violet, red-orange. There are so many different combinations that you could do, and we're just going to choose one set of 3 analogous colors. So let's say you want to do blue, blue-green, and green. The only 2 colors that you will need from this palette are blue and green. Okay, you won't need any other color. So please stick to your analogous colors. That means we will not be using brown or black. They're not really next door neighbors to anyone else on the color wheel, so we're just gonna leave those out and focus on our 3 primary and 3 secondary colors to create a new tertiary color. So this is called watercolor paint, so we need to add water to it, okay? Right now, this paint is very dry. If I touch it with my fingers, nothing is coming off. So what we need to do is take our beautiful watercolor brush and pick up some water. The great thing about watercolor brushes are that they're very soft, so they hold a lot of water, okay? These bristles are very delicate, so we need to be super careful while using them. All right? Now this will not work if you have just a little bit of water. You need to soak that brush with some water. And for my background, I think I want to do green, blue, green, and green. So first I need to wake up my blue paint, okay? And I say wake up because these paints are kind of like they're sleeping. And the way we wake this paint up is we keep adding water to it, okay? But the key to this palette is we don't want to mix colors on the palette, all right? We can only mix colors on our paper. Okay, and if you have enough water on your paintbrush, then it should just glide across your paper like this. We want this to be relatively wet, okay? There should be no brush streaks. We want to cover this whole paper with our primary color blue, secondary color green, and when you mix them together, it makes that beautiful blue-green. And you might notice that your paper starts curling up a little bit. That is okay, it's just because there's water hitting the paper, so it wants to curl. But that doesn't really matter to us. It is totally fine. And as you can see, I'm just going back and forth with my blue and my green. Watercolors are one of my favorite paints to paint with because it really has a mind of its own. We really shouldn't try to control it too much, okay? As you can see, I'm just dripping paper on there, adding colors where I want them, and it's really starting to want to curl up, so I'm just gonna hold it down a little bit. All right. And if you want a certain area to be darker, then you can just add more paint. But if you want it to be lighter, then you're gonna add more water. And as you can see, the water is just going wherever it wants to go. And that's the reason why I love watercolor paint, because it just has a mind of its own. And that's exactly what we want, is we want it to have its own mind and do whatever it wants to do on the paper. The only thing that we're doing is adding color where we want it and moving that water around a little bit, but not too much. Okay, so I think I want some of this area to be a little darker, so I'm just gonna add some more blues. And most of this is going to be covered up by our portrait, but I thought it would be fun to experiment with this watercolor so you guys can see how watercolor moves, how it acts, how it behaves when you add it to your paper. Okay, the part that's mainly going to be showing is the top part. Okay, so I just want to add a little bit more green in there. And this is really wanting to curl up more than I expected. So I'm just going to hold it down a little bit. And you'll probably get paint on your fingers, and that's okay. All right, art is kind of messy sometimes. Totally fine. We can wash our hands later. All right. Ooh, where I pressed it down, that's where all the water is wanting to go now. And if you do get paint and water on your hands, you can actually just wipe it off on your messy mat. And if you do just little dots here and there, it actually creates a really cool effect. All right, so I think I'm happy with how this looks so far. Now what we're going to do while this is still wet, this needs to be pretty wet for this technique to work, okay? So make sure if you're painting with watercolor, it needs to be really wet. And actually I'm gonna wet a few more areas. This technique will not work if your painting is all dried up, okay? So while the painting is really wet, I'm actually gonna take just regular table salt, and what you wanna do is just take a little pinch of it, and from up high, I'm just gonna sprinkle it on my paper. We don't wanna put too much on there. Pretend like you are salting your dinner or something. You don't wanna have your salt in just one little area. You want it to be sprinkled all across your food. And that is the same for this painting. Okay, so that's why we go from up high, so your salt spreads out a little bit more too. Okay, and that's literally all the salt that we need. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to let this do its thing, and the magic happens when it dries, okay? It creates this really cool effect and design, which will be absolutely beautiful for the background of our gratitude portraits. All right, so now that I have paint in my paper, and while it was still wet, I added just a little sprinkling of salt from up high, making sure all the salt was spread out and dispersed across my painting evenly, and I don't have too much salt in one area. Then I am done for the week. What we need to do now is let this dry 100%. Do not touch it anymore after you add the salt, and make sure you hold on to it because we are going to use it for next week. All right, I hope you guys have a lot of fun creating this beautiful watercolor background. I know they're going to be amazing because you guys are amazing. All right, guys, I will see you next time. Bye.